The wind howled across the barren landscape of Orth 7, a planet long abandoned by settlers. The sky was a deep shade of violet, and the twin suns had just dipped below the jagged mountains in the distance. Daniel Carter, the lone human traveler, adjusted the strap on his survival pack and scanned the ruins ahead. He wasn't here for adventure, just passing through, looking for supplies before heading to the next star system. Then he saw it, a faint trail of footprints in the dust. Daniel frowned. No human had lived on this planet in years. The only ones who came here now were scavengers, mercenaries, or outlaws. His instincts told him to stay away, but curiosity got the better of him. He followed the tracks carefully, his hand resting near the small energy pistol on his belt. The footprints led to a crumbling structure, what was once a communications hub. The door was barely hanging onto its hinges, and inside, the air was thick with dust. Then he heard breathing. Shallow, weak. His eyes adjusted to the dim light, and he saw her. She was curled against the wall, covered in a tattered cloak. Her skin shimmered faintly in the darkness, reflecting the moonlight that seeped through a hole in the roof. Her arms were wrapped around herself, and her breathing was ragged. She was an alien. Daniel had seen many species in his travels, but he had never seen one like her. Her skin shifted between soft silver and deep blue, almost like liquid metal. Her long dark hair was tangled, and there were cuts along her arms. Fresh wounds. She had been running from something. His first instinct was to back away. Whoever she was in trouble. And trouble meant danger. But then she looked up. Her eyes, a deep, glowing violet, locked onto his. There was no fear in them, no anger, only exhaustion. She tried to move, but her body gave out. She collapsed against the wall, too weak to stand. Daniel hesitated. If she was an outlaw, helping her could bring him trouble. If she was a fugitive, someone would come looking for her. He sighed. "You're hurt," he said, kneeling beside her. "Can you understand me?" The alien woman blinked slowly. She opened her mouth, but no words came out, only a soft hiss of breath. Daniel reached into his pack and pulled out a small water flask. He uncapped it and held it out to her. "Drink." For a moment, she didn't move. Her eyes flickered between the flask and his face, as if trying to decide if this was a trap. Then, with shaking hands, she took it. She lifted it to her lips and drank slowly, careful not to spill a drop. Daniel waited, watching her. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. When she opened them again, there was something different in her expression, something softer. "Who?" Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "Who are you?" "Daniel Carter," he said simply. "And you?" She hesitated. Then, after a long pause, she whispered, "Sally." Daniel nodded. "All right, Sally. Looks like you need help." She tensed, as if expecting him to betray her. "I'm not gonna turn you in," he said quickly, sensing her fear. "Just tell me what happened." Sally glanced toward the ruined doorway, as if expecting someone to burst in at any moment. Her hands clenched around the flask. "They're looking for me," she whispered. "They will come soon." Daniel's stomach tightened. "Who?" Sally took another slow breath. "The ones who took everything from me." Silence filled the space between them. Outside, the wind howled through the ruins. Daniel exhaled slowly. He had two choices: walk away before this became his problem, or stay and risk everything to help her. He looked at Sally again, her tired eyes, her bruised arms, her desperate attempt to stay strong. He had made his decision. "Then we need to get you out of here." The air inside the ruined structure was heavy with silence. Daniel Carter sat on a broken metal crate, his eyes scanning the dimly lit space where the alien woman, Sally, rested. She was weak, her silver-blue skin bruised, and her breathing uneven. Outside, the wind howled like a warning. Daniel knew he had made a risky choice. He could have walked away, left her to her fate. But something in her eyes had stopped him. She wasn't just a fugitive. She was scared. And whoever was hunting her was coming soon. "Tell me what happened," Daniel said finally, keeping his voice low. Sally hesitated. Her fingers tightened around the empty water flask he had given her. Then, after a long breath, she spoke. "I was taken from my world," she whispered. "A warlord wanted to use my abilities, but I escaped." Daniel frowned. "A warlord?" She nodded. "His name is Vecren. He hunts those like me. He collects us." Her voice trembled slightly. "He never lets anyone go." Daniel's grip on his belt tightened. He had heard of warlords like Vecren before, ruthless leaders who captured valuable beings and used them as weapons, spies, or worse. "And now he's looking for you," Daniel muttered. Sally nodded again. Daniel exhaled sharply. "How long do we have?" Sally's violet eyes flickered toward the doorway. "Not long." That was all he needed to hear. Daniel stood and grabbed his pack. "Then we need to move. Now." Sally pushed herself up weakly, but her body was still too weak to stand. Daniel cursed under his breath. She wouldn't make it far on foot, not in this condition. He crouched down beside her. "Can you walk?" Sally tried but collapsed almost immediately. She winced, frustration flashing across her face. Daniel sighed. "All right, hold on." Before she could protest, he lifted her onto his back. She was lighter than he expected, her body trembling against his as she clung to his shoulders. Outside, the wind howled through the ruins. Daniel stepped carefully, scanning the shadows for movement. He needed to get to his ship. They made it through the broken streets in silence, Sally breathing weakly against his shoulder. Then, a noise. A deep metallic humming. Daniel froze. Drones. His heartbeat quickened. He recognized that sound. It was a scanner drone, searching for heat signatures. If it detected them, it would alert Vecren's men in seconds. He quickly ducked behind a collapsed wall, holding his breath. The drone hovered past, its red lights scanning the ruins. Sally tensed. Daniel felt her fingers tighten around his shoulders. She was terrified. The drone lingered for a few seconds, then moved away. Daniel let out a slow breath. That was too close. Sally's voice was barely above a whisper. "More will come." He knew she was right. They had to get off this planet. Now. They finally reached the edge of the ruins, where Daniel had hidden his small starship beneath a layer of old debris. He carefully set Sally down and tapped a small panel on the ground. The ship's camouflage field deactivated, revealing the sleek, compact vessel beneath. "Can you fly?" Sally asked, her voice still weak. Daniel smirked. "Better than most." He helped her inside and sealed the hatch. The ship's systems hummed to life, glowing screens lighting up the dim cockpit. But as Daniel reached for the controls, a sharp beeping filled the cabin. A tracker signal. His stomach dropped. "They found us," he muttered. Sally's eyes widened. "They're coming." Outside, distant engines roared. Vecren's forces were arriving. Daniel's fingers flew across the controls. "Then we better leave before they get the chance to say hello." With a loud blast, the ship lifted off the ground, rocketing into the sky. Below them, armored vehicles rushed toward the ruins, but they were too late. Daniel and Sally were already gone. As they broke through the planet's atmosphere, Sally looked at him. For the first time since they met, her eyes held something other than fear. Hope. The hum of the ship's engines filled the small cockpit as Daniel Carter guided it through the dark void of space. The planet Vorith 7 was now just a distant dot behind them, and for the first time in hours, they were safe, at least for now. Sally sat in the co-pilot's chair, her body still weak from exhaustion. Her silver-blue skin looked pale under the dim lights of the ship. She stared at the vast emptiness outside the window, her violet eyes reflecting the stars. Daniel glanced at her. "You all right?" She didn't answer right away. Her fingers curled slightly against the fabric of her cloak. "I don't know," she admitted. Daniel sighed. He understood that feeling. Escaping was only the first step. "We got out," he said, keeping his voice calm. "That's what matters right now." Sally turned her gaze to him. "You didn't have to help me." He shrugged. "Yeah, well, I'm not great at leaving people behind." A faint shadow of something, maybe a smile, touched her lips, but it disappeared just as quickly. Daniel turned his attention back to the controls. "All right, we need to figure out where we're going next. Got any ideas?" Sally hesitated. "No, I've been running for so long. I don't know where to go anymore." Daniel frowned. That was a problem. He had no idea what kind of resources Vikran had, but if he was powerful enough to have scanner drones on a dead planet, then he wouldn't stop hunting Sally just because they ran. "You have a homeworld?" Daniel asked. Sally shook her head. It was destroyed. Daniel's grip tightened on the flight controls. Destroyed. That explained why she had nowhere to go. He sighed. "Well, we can't just float around in space forever. Someone will pick up our trail sooner or later." Sally lowered her head slightly. She looked tired, not just from the escape, but from everything. Daniel leaned back in his seat. "All right, we'll find a safe place, somewhere out of Vikran's reach." She looked at him, surprise flickering across her face. "You still want to help me?" Daniel gave a half smile. "Hey, I already started. Might as well finish the job." A long silence followed. Outside, the stars stretched endlessly in all directions. Then, a sudden beep. Daniel's stomach dropped. He recognized that sound. A proximity alert. His fingers moved swiftly over the control panel. A small screen flickered to life, displaying the source of the signal. Sally stiffened. "What is it?" Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Someone's following us." Sally's breathing became shallow. Vikran. Daniel couldn't be sure, but the way the ship was moving, staying just at the edge of their sensors, it was clear that whoever it was, they were tracking them. He clenched his jaw. "We need to lose them." Sally's hands gripped the edge of her seat. "What if we can't?" Daniel smirked. "Then I hope they enjoy surprises." He slammed a button on the control panel. The ship jerked, engines roaring as it shot forward at full speed. Stars became streaks of light outside the window. Sally gasped, grabbing onto the dashboard. "What are you doing?" "Outrunning them," Daniel said, adjusting the thrusters. "And if that doesn't work?" A warning light flashed red. Daniel cursed under his breath. The enemy ship was gaining. Sally's voice was tense. "They're faster." Daniel's mind raced. He couldn't outfly them. Not with his ship's limited speed. He needed another plan. Then he saw it, an asteroid belt, dense and unpredictable. A crazy idea formed in his mind. He grinned. "Hold on." Before Sally could question him, he veered the ship straight into the asteroid field. The moment they entered, alarms blared. Giant rocks tumbled in all directions, some the size of small buildings. The ship's computer screamed warnings, but Daniel didn't slow down. Sally's eyes widened. "Are you insane?" Daniel smirked. "Depends on who you ask." He weaved through the floating debris, narrowly dodging massive asteroids that could crush them in an instant. Behind them, the pursuing ship hesitated at the edge of the field. Sally gripped the dashboard. "They won't follow us in here, will they?" Daniel chuckled. "If they're smart, they won't." And then, the ship behind them made its choice. It entered the asteroid field. Daniel's smirk disappeared. "Guess they're not smart." Sally's voice was tense. "What now?" Daniel's eyes flickered across the controls. He had one more trick left. "If they want to chase us," he muttered, "let's make them regret it." He reached for a lever and pulled it. The ship's thrusters cut out for half a second, just enough to let gravity take over. Their ship dropped suddenly, sliding between two asteroids just as the enemy ship fired. The energy blast missed, but it hit an asteroid instead. Boom! A massive explosion sent debris flying in all directions. The shockwave sent the enemy ship spinning. Sally gasped as the bright explosion filled the cockpit's window. Daniel grinned. That should keep them busy. He pressed the thrusters again, and their ship slipped away, leaving the asteroid belt behind. As the light of the explosion faded, the enemy ship was lost behind a sea of floating debris. For the first time in hours, the proximity alarm went silent. Daniel leaned back with a sigh. Well, that was fun. Sally gave him a long, stunned look. Then, to his surprise, she laughed softly. "You're reckless," she said, shaking her head. Daniel smirked. "Yeah, but we're alive." Sally looked out the window, where nothing but stars surrounded them once more. For now, at least, they were safe. But deep in her heart, she knew one thing for certain. Vikran wasn't done searching for her, and sooner or later, he would come again. The silence of deep space surrounded the small starship as it drifted near an uncharted moon. The flickering glow of the ship's control panels was the only light inside the cockpit, casting long shadows across the narrow walls. Daniel Carter leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. His fingers tapped against the armrest as he stared at the empty void beyond the glass. It had been days since they escaped the asteroid field, and for now, there were no signs of pursuit. But he knew it was only a matter of time. Behind him, Sally sat on the small cot in the corner, wrapping her arms around herself. Her silver-blue skin had regained some of its natural glow, but her movements were still slow, cautious. "You should get some rest," Daniel said, glancing at her. Sally didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked out the window, her violet eyes filled with thought. "I've rested enough," she murmured. Daniel sighed. He knew what she was thinking about. Vikran. Even though they had escaped, Sally had said it herself. He never lets anyone go. And no matter how far they ran, Daniel had a feeling that Vikran's reach was longer than they expected. Still, they had no leads, no plan, just empty space and uncertainty. "You don't have to stay," Sally said suddenly. Daniel frowned. "What?" "You saved me," she said, her voice quiet. "You didn't have to, but you did. And I don't want to put you in more danger because of me." Daniel leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You think I'm just going to drop you off at the next station and pretend this never happened?" Sally didn't respond. Daniel chuckled. "Not happening." She turned to look at him, her expression unreadable. "Why?" Daniel shrugged. "Call it instinct. Call it bad decision-making. But I don't leave people behind, Sally. That's not who I am." A long silence followed. For the first time in what felt like forever, Sally smiled. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was there. Daniel opened his mouth to say something else, but then the alarms started beeping. His heart jumped. Sally shot to her feet. "What is it?" Daniel's hands flew over the controls. "I don't know. Something's triggering the proximity sensors." His eyes scanned the radar screen. Something was outside the ship. Sally's body tensed. "Vikran." Daniel shook his head. "No, it's just one ship. And it's not attacking." They exchanged a quick glance. That wasn't normal. Daniel cautiously reached for the comm system. "Unknown vessel, identify yourself." For a long moment, there was no response. Just static. Then, a voice. "You let me go, human. Now I return the favor." Sally's breath caught in her throat. That voice. The ship's exterior cameras flickered on, displaying an image of the vessel outside. It was sleek, dark, and familiar. Sally's eyes widened. "It's her." Daniel frowned. "Who?" Sally's voice was filled with disbelief. "An ally. One I thought I lost." The comms crackled again. "Lower your shields. I come bearing a gift." Daniel hesitated. He didn't trust easily, but Sally's expression told him everything he needed to know. With a reluctant sigh, he pressed a button. Shields lowered. The other ship moved closer. A small transport pod detached from its hull, and drifted toward their docking bay. Minutes later, a figure stepped through the airlock. She was tall, her armored suit gleaming under the ship's dim lights. Her silver-blue skin marked her as one of Sally's kind, but her gaze was sharp, filled with strength. "Sally," she said, her voice softer now. "You're alive." Sally took a step forward. You came back." The woman nodded. "Because you deserve the truth, and because I bring something that might change everything." She reached into a small satchel on her hip and pulled out a glowing artifact. Daniel's eyes narrowed. "What is that?" The woman held it out. A key. Sally's fingers trembled as she took it. A soft humming filled the air as the artifact pulsed with energy. Daniel could feel it. Something powerful. The armored woman looked at both of them. "You were right to run. Vikran won't stop until he has you." She turned to Daniel. "And now that you've helped her, he'll come for you too." Daniel crossed his arms. "Great. That's just what I needed." Sally looked down at the artifact, her violet eyes reflecting its glow. "But why give this to me?" The woman's expression turned serious. "Because it's the only thing Vikran fears." Silence filled the ship. Daniel exhaled slowly. "Well," he said, rubbing the back of his neck, "guess we're not running anymore." Sally clenched the artifact in her hands. They had a new mission now. And this time, they weren't just escaping. They were fighting back. The artifact hummed softly in Sally's hands, its glow pulsing like a heartbeat. Daniel Carter stared at it, his instincts screaming that whatever this thing was, it wasn't just a simple key. He crossed his arms. "All right, someone needs to explain what this thing does before I start regretting lowering my shields." The armored woman, Zira, glanced at him before focusing on Sally. "It's time you knew the truth." Sally's violet eyes flickered with uncertainty. "What truth?" Zira stepped forward, her movements precise, almost military. "Vikran doesn't just want you because of your abilities. He wants this." She gestured at the artifact. "Because it's a map. A map to something ancient. Something powerful enough to destroy him." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Destroy him? You're telling me this thing leads to a weapon?" Zira nodded. "More than a weapon. A force. Something our people once guarded before the war wiped everything away." Sally tightened her grip on the artifact. "Then why didn't I know about it?" Zira's expression darkened. "Because the knowledge was erased. Hidden. Only a few of us even remember the stories." She paused, glancing at Daniel. "Vikran is afraid of this. That's why he hunts anyone connected to it. And that's why he won't stop chasing you." Daniel rubbed his temple. "Great. So we're not just running from a warlord. We're holding on to the one thing he fears most. That's just perfect." Zira ignored his sarcasm. "You wanted to stop running." She looked at Sally. "Then this is your chance." Sally stared at the artifact, her thoughts racing. For so long, she had been running, hiding, just trying to survive. But now she had a choice. She looked at Daniel. "You don't have to stay." Daniel sighed. "I know." He met her gaze. "But I will." Sally's fingers tightened around the artifact. "Then we find out where this leads." The first clue. The ship's systems scanned the artifact, analyzing its structure. Strange symbols flickered across the screen, forming patterns Daniel couldn't recognize. "It's old," Daniel muttered. "Really old." Zira nodded. "Older than any civilization recorded." As the analysis continued, the artifact pulsed again. Suddenly, the ship's navigation system lit up, displaying a set of coordinates. Sally's eyes widened. "It's leading us somewhere." Daniel leaned closer. "That's a restricted sector." Zira's expression remained unreadable. "Which means whatever is there, Vikran probably doesn't want anyone finding it." Daniel exhaled. "That's a good enough reason to check it out." He turned to Sally. "You ready for this?" She took a deep breath. "No, but let's go anyway." Daniel smirked. "That's the spirit." A dangerous journey. With the new coordinates set, Daniel engaged the ship's hyperdrive. Stars stretched into long streaks of light as they entered faster than light travel. Minutes passed in silence. Sally sat near the artifact, staring at it as if hoping it would speak to her. Daniel stole a glance at her. "What's on your mind?" She hesitated. "If this is real, if there really is something that can stop Vikran, then I have to find it." Daniel nodded. "And if it's a trap?" Sally's fingers traced the glowing patterns on the artifact. "Then we fight." Daniel chuckled. "Didn't take you for the fighter type." Sally smiled faintly. "I wasn't, but you don't survive this long without learning how to stand up." Zira crossed her arms. "Good, because this mission is only going to get harder." Daniel sighed. "Fantastic. Just what I wanted. More life-threatening danger." Suddenly, the ship's alarms blared. Daniel's hands flew to the controls. "What now?" Zira narrowed her eyes at the screen. "We've got company." Daniel's stomach tightened. "Vikran." Sally's eyes darkened. "No." Daniel frowned. "Then who?" Sally's voice was quiet but firm. "Something worse." The ship lurched, and the view outside changed. They had arrived. But what awaited them was far more terrifying than anything they had imagined. The ship lurched violently, throwing Daniel Carter against his seat. The flashing red lights in the cockpit confirmed what his instincts already told him. They were in serious trouble. Zira tightened her grip on the console. "We have multiple ships incoming." Sally's violet eyes darkened as she stared at the sensor screen. "They found us." Daniel's fingers flew across the controls. "I thought we lost them." Zira's voice was tense. "Vikran has spies everywhere. If we activated the artifact, he could have tracked its signal." Daniel gritted his teeth. "Great. So now we got mercenaries on our tail while flying into the unknown." Outside, 3 dark ships appeared from hyperspace, forming a blockade between them and the mysterious planet below. Their sleek, black hulls glowed with red energy, a design Daniel had seen before. "Vikran's elite hunters," Zira muttered. "He sent his best." Sally's hands clenched into fists. "They want the artifact." A voice crackled through the ship's comm system. It was cold, sharp, and laced with amusement. "You should have kept running, Sally." Her breath hitched. She recognized that voice. Drakis, Vikran's second-in-command. "You were a fool to think you could escape," Drakis continued. "And an even bigger fool to think a human could help you." Daniel rolled his eyes. "I feel like I'm being insulted." Zira's expression remained hard. Drakis never speaks unless he knows he has the upper hand. Daniel glanced at the weapon systems. "Well, I'd love to ruin his confidence." Sally exhaled. "No, we can't fight them. Not here." Daniel's brow furrowed. "You want to surrender?" Sally shook her head. "No, I want to outthink them. A desperate plan." Drakis' voice echoed again. "Hand over the artifact. You have nowhere to run." Daniel smirked. "That's where you're wrong." He yanked the controls hard, sending the ship into a sharp dive toward the planet below. Sally's eyes widened. "What are you doing?" "Buying us time," Daniel shouted as he dodged incoming laser fire. The ship rocketed downward, weaving between massive storm clouds that crackled with energy. Below them, the planet's surface was barely visible through the turbulence, but Daniel wasn't slowing down. The enemy ships followed, trying to keep up. Zira gripped her seat. "This is madness." Daniel grinned. "No, this is called making them nervous." Lightning flashed around them as the storm thickened. The enemy ships hesitated, slowing slightly. "They're not used to flying in conditions like this," Sally realized. Daniel nodded. "Exactly. And that's why." A sudden explosion shook the ship. Warning lights flashed. Zira cursed. "Direct hit. Shields are failing." Daniel clenched his jaw. "Hold on." He spotted a canyon through the storm, narrow, unpredictable, and exactly what he needed. The ship plunged into the canyon, skimming dangerously close to the rocky walls. The enemy ships hesitated again. "They don't want to follow us in," Sally murmured. Daniel smirked. "Then let's make sure they regret it." Turning the tables. As the mercenary ships hovered above the canyon, waiting for them to reappear, Zyra activated the artifact. A strange pulse of energy spread outward. The storm reacted. The lightning intensified, striking randomly through the sky. Sally gasped. "The artifact is affecting the planet's atmosphere." Outside, one of the enemy ships veered too close to the storm. Boom! It exploded in a bright flash, sending debris scattering. Drek's voice returned, this time angry. "That was a mistake, Sally." But she wasn't afraid anymore. She looked at Daniel. "We need to reach the ground." Daniel nodded. "Hold on tight." With a final burst of speed, the ship broke through the storm, heading toward the surface below. They had escaped the hunters, for now. But as they landed, Daniel had a feeling that the real danger was only beginning. The ship shuddered as it touched down on the rocky surface of the mysterious planet. Sparks flickered from the damaged engines, and the soft hum of power systems slowly faded. For a moment, there was silence, a calm after the storm. Daniel Carter exhaled, his hand still gripping the flight controls. "Well," he muttered, "that was fun." Sally, sitting beside him, let out a slow breath. "We almost died." Daniel grinned. "Yeah, but we didn't." Zero was already at the scanners, analyzing the terrain outside. "We don't have much time. The mercenaries will return soon." Sally held the artifact tightly in her hands, its glow pulsing softly. "Then we need to move. This place, it's important. I can feel it." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "You can feel it?" Sally hesitated, then nodded. "The artifact. It's responding to something here." Daniel looked at Zyra. "Is that normal?" Zyra crossed her arms. "Not for most people, but Sally's kind. They were connected to something ancient." She glanced at the artifact. "And this might be proof of that." Daniel sighed. "All right. Let's go find out what's so special about this place." The hidden entrance. The planet's surface was rough and desolate, with dark gray rocks stretching into the distance. Strange energy storms flickered in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. As they moved away from the ship, Sally led the way, her grip on the artifact tightening. Every few steps, the glow brightened, as if pulling her toward something. Daniel kept a hand near his weapon. Anyone else getting a bad feeling about this? Zyra scanned the surroundings. "The energy levels here are unstable. We should be careful." Sally suddenly stopped. Ahead of them was a massive stone structure, half buried in the rocky terrain. Ancient symbols, similar to those on the artifact, were carved into the surface. Daniel whistled. "Well, that's not ominous at all." Sally stepped forward, raising the artifact. The moment it came near the stone wall, the carvings lit up, sending a soft ripple of energy across the surface. Then, the ground trembled. Daniel staggered. "I don't like this." The stone shifted, revealing the hidden entrance. A deep, dark passage stretched downward, disappearing into the unknown. Sally's voice was barely above a whisper. "It's opening for us." A legacy uncovered. They stepped inside cautiously, the glow from the artifact lighting the path. The walls were covered in ancient markings, telling stories of a civilization long forgotten. Zyra ran her fingers over the symbols. "This is older than anything recorded. If Vikran knew about this place." Sally frowned. "Then we can't let him find it." As they reached the end of the corridor, the space opened up into a massive chamber. In the center stood a floating structure made of the same stone as the walls but covered in glowing symbols. The air around it hummed with raw energy. Daniel tilted his head. "So, what exactly is that?" Sally's expression was unreadable. "A power. One that was meant to be protected, not controlled." She stepped forward, the artifact in her hands glowing brighter. The moment it touched the floating structure, light erupted around them. Symbols danced across the air, forming patterns Daniel couldn't understand. Sally's eyes widened. This is why Vecren wants it. He thinks it's a weapon. Daniel frowned. And is it? Sally shook her head. No, it's knowledge. A history that was erased. A way to end his rule. Zura's eyes narrowed. Then we have to protect it. Because if Vecren gets here, she didn't need to finish the sentence. The fight ahead. The moment of peace didn't last long. A loud beeping echoed from Zura's scanner. Daniel tensed. Tell me that's not what I think it is. Zura's face hardened. They found us. Sally's hands trembled as she looked at the structure. We can't let them take this. Daniel pulled out his weapon. Then we fight. Zura nodded. We make our stand here. Sally looked at them both, determination burning in her violet eyes. We don't just fight. She turned to the ancient structure, the symbols glowing around her. We finish this. Outside, the mercenary ships were descending. Inside, a forgotten power was awakening. The battle was about to begin. And this time, they weren't running anymore.